We've got a team based at Imperial College in London, mainly made up of computer scientists, bioinformaticians. My boss is actually a GP on a Monday as well, so we're quite a diverse group. We also have an anthropologist working for us, so she does user experience, user research, and an interactive designer as well. Also, we've got a team based in Leuven in Belgium, actually working very closely with Janssen in their wet labs, mainly around deep learning, machine learning, and kind of automation. So we've got a very diverse kind of set of projects that we're doing, from things like chemogenomics, machine learning in healthcare, image analysis, so lots and lots of different types of things, and engage with, obviously, because we're Intel, engage with lots and lots of different partners and people.
Hello, my name is Sonal Patel. I work at Roche, based in Basel at the Innovation Centre. The group I'm currently in is called the External Innovation Group, and I was just listening to the panel earlier, and maybe I'll just give you a bit of background on Roche. So Roche acquired Genentech, and actually Roche is an independent company. We're actually firewalled, so there's two different, even though we're one group, Roche and Genentech are different. So I'm based at Roche, and I support pharma research and early development across the therapy areas of oncology, rare diseases, neurosciences, infectious diseases. So what I do is that we look for opportunities, we work very closely with partnering, and we work with entrepreneurs like yourselves to actually de-risk, develop collaboration plans, and bring them in. So my training is a biochemist and pharmacologist. I started in biotech for a number of years, leading groups, working at the bench, and moved into big pharma after that. So I'm happy to take any questions after.
Is this working? Can you hear me on this one? Okay, so my name is Richard Mason. I'm the new head of the Johnson & Johnson Innovation Centre in London. And that's responsible for external innovation, external R&D across the whole of Europe. I actually joined Johnson & Johnson only 3 months ago. Prior to that, I was running a startup that was spun out of the University of Cambridge and Adam Brooks Hospital called XO1, which Johnson & Johnson acquired last year. And my background, before going into the biotechnology industry, where I've spent the last 16, 17 years, I trained as a doctor, hospital doctor right here in Barts, and I've spent many, many hours in this lecture theatre. They didn't have red walls when I was here.
Fantastic. Okay, so in this seminar, we're going to talk about two key categories. So one is business models, and the second is going to be exit types. Okay, and within business models, we're going to describe and discuss the opportunities and challenges associated with A, virtual companies, B, some integrated companies, and C, some platform plays. Okay, and for each, we're going to discuss some examples. Specifically to exits, we're then going to discuss some IPOs, trade sales, and licensing deals. And again, we're going to briefly introduce each and then discuss some opportunities and challenges as well. So let's first dive into different business models, so business models themselves. So let's start with virtual companies. So Richard, you're best suited at this point, or for the panel. Could you describe us what is a virtual company, knowing we're all quite naive with regards to what this is? What's the business model and some opportunities and challenges that it presents? Okay,
I think that's the first thing I preface this. There's no one-size-fits-all. There's no one solution. I'm not going to say that all companies need to be virtual or asset-centric, and I'll explain that. You've got to choose what's appropriate to your strategy, to what you're trying to achieve, to your product, or to your service. But I know why Dan's picked on me for this, because the XO1 company I ran until last year, until its acquisition, was a virtual company, and it was an asset-centric company. So I have had first-hand experience of it, and I like the model. For the right opportunity, I really like it. What it means is a virtual company really does not invest heavily or at all in the traditional things you might see in a company, like infrastructure, staff, equipment, and so on. And I think the idea of virtual companies has been around for a long time, but it's incredible how over the last few years, changes in things like technology have made virtualization of companies incredibly easy to do. So at XO1, I was actually the only employee in the company. The only assets we owned apart from my intellectual property license to the intellectual property from the University of Cambridge, the only assets we owned was my laptop stand, and my monitor, and an external hard drive. I think that was it. That was all we owned. We had a large team of people working on this project, some of whom were consultants, some of which were companies that we're contracted with. And it's incredibly easy in the modern day to actually set up contracts with people, consultancy-based contracts or service providers. And they can be anywhere in the world. Technology's moved on, and some of my team were based in the States. And the beauty of this is you don't have to, when you have capital in a startup, it's very scarce. It's actually scarce in any company, regardless of the size. But you really need to use that money wisely. And my analogy is charity. You hear the old phrase, for every 99 pence in the pound, every pound you donate, 99 pence goes to the people in need. Well, in business, we want to be as capital efficient as possible. And you want to, for every pound you invest, 99 pence goes into the actual project or the service you're trying to develop, rather than into bricks and mortar, into large, salary bases and so on. And why that's, for small companies, that can be really important, because if you've got a workforce, it's difficult to hire a workforce, and once you've got a workforce, you've kind of got it. It's not something you can bring up and down easily, and if you do have to make it smaller, can be terribly morale destroying. So for high risk companies, can you actually avoid taking staff on? Can you employ people, but through different mechanisms, where you can have a slice of their time, and if things don't work out, you can dial it down easily? At Exo 1, we hit a roadblock at one point, and we almost needed to do a crash stop on the program to stop the cash expenditure. And because we were virtual, we were able to dial down expenditures with consultants, with contract research providers, very, very rapidly. So it gave us a lot of flexibility to then divert the funds into solving the problem. We solved the problem, and we're able to ramp it up again. And now that's just a basic overview of what virtual means. The other word, phrase I used was asset-centric. And asset-centric is really about saying we're all about one product or one service, and we're totally focused on developing that. We're not going to put our minds on anything else. We're going to focus on one thing, and it tends to actually enable being virtual, because once you've got a large number of projects, the buy-build thing starts to mean you probably do need, it may be more efficient to hire people. So asset-centric and virtual tend to go hand in hand. And the beauty with asset-centric is all the focus of anybody involved in that company is on that one asset, and they live and die by that asset. And if it's not working, it actually interestingly puts a tremendous incentive on killing the project early, because there's something better you can go and do. I've seen a lot of startups who stay with their idea doggedly too long. And we all hear, there's a lot of folklore about the companies, the tenacious entrepreneur who went on and went on. It was only because they went on forever and ever that they actually got the product through. And that is sometimes true. But there are also many examples of where people went on far too long with an idea that was never going to work. So failing things early, and the cost of setting up companies, all companies now could be startups, could be seen as experiments, and some experiments fail. So set them up and fail them cheaply. And the beauty of asset-centric is, because there's so much opportunity cost of being involved in one thing, actually it incentivizes you to make those tough decisions early, because there are so many ideas out there, so many things you can prosecute. But I'll just back up to saying asset-centric virtual is just one model, and it's applicable to certain types of opportunity, and it's by no means the only way to set up companies. It's just what I was doing last.
Okay, so you spoke actually quite a bit around some opportunities there. So capital efficient, a lot of focus on the product. What are maybe some challenges of a virtual company, and maybe some settings where it's not appropriate, such as blue sky research, for instance, is probably...
I think it's very applicable to highly applied research. You really know what you're going after. It's very labour intensive, it's very management intensive. You're managing multiple people who are, multiple contracts, people who don't automatically report to you. And I suppose the question is scalability. It really lends itself to very focused projects. And what was the other question you asked? Sorry?
No, that was pretty much it.
Okay.
It's the challenges and where it fits and doesn't. So that's a very good seg. Thank you, Richard. Asset-centric approach or virtual company, you're very much focused on developing that product. There's not a large sales team, not a large marketing team associated with that. unlike a fully integrated company such as Roche, where you're doing discovery and A to Z. Actually, Sonal, why don't I turn it over to you? It sounds obvious what it is, but what is a fully integrated business model when it comes to healthcare?
So, I think most people know about Roche, but Roche is a large global company that does the whole integrated process from drug discovery, and that could be any modality. So we work across modalities, which could be RNA, DNA therapeutics, large molecules, fragments of antibodies, across the whole gamut, and small molecules that everybody's aware of. We also have a large diagnostics group, so we work with devices as well. So that when we talk about a fully integrated company, it means that we're working from right at the start of an idea to taking that through all the way to launch, commercialization, through the regulatory channels, basically to product and to the patients. So we have huge sales force out there to then build those franchises and sell that product.
What are some of the opportunities and challenges of, say, going from A to Z, having
Well,
everything in-house?
There's a large footprint. So I've come from, as I said, I've worked in biotech and I've worked in pharma. So what you know about a big global company is there's a huge footprint. To do all of that is thousands of people. There's costs associated with that. And so when we embark on an idea or an opportunity, we have to have that line of sight to the product, because there's a huge investment that goes along the way. It's billions, right, when you talk about some of these opportunities. So there's a huge team, and I think the great thing about pharma is you've got expertise across this space. So when you approach a pharma company, you will be able to tap into these areas. So you will get input about people will ask you about your commercialization, your clinical plans, your regulatory plans. And I think the great thing is that in pharma, we're under one roof and we have access to that. When you're in a biotech, you're having to fill a lot of those gaps in the best way that you can. And I think talking in the earlier panels is that, if you take advantage of talking, if you've got to get your business plan out there, get feedback, but try to fill some of those gaps with people that have that deep expertise. And that's what I love about the pharma organisation, is that I find every nuanced expert under one roof. So it's a very privileged place to be. But the challenges are things can be a lot slower in terms of decision making, which, again, people from the outside, when they work with a pharma, they're not getting that response within 24 hours to their idea. It takes time. There's lots of reasons for that, but it's because it's a huge organisation. The other thing that people probably don't appreciate from the outside is, because of this whole streamlined process, there's different budgets at play, there's different governance at play, and you've got to take that strategy all the way through. From a biotech perspective, where you're much more in control of your finances, your decisions, this is a much faster process. And
this is applicable as well to the devices companies, the digital health companies, the diagnostic companies out there. If you're going to be an integrated company, you're going to eventually need to hire a sales force, a marketing force to bring your product forward. If you're planning to just exit, after you demonstrate your device works, exit to J&J or whatnot, then you could try to just stay focused on the product. But there is a lot more capital intensive when you're trying to do it all under one roof. So moving on to a platform company, I know this is quite relevant to a lot of you, because because we have prepared your applications, a lot of you are platform companies. Craig, I could either do it, or do you want to describe from your perspective, a platform company, and what are some challenges of trying to create a platform?
So I think probably from an Intel perspective, one of the challenges is that people think of us as a chip manufacturer, and that's kind of what we do. We put ourselves in computers and phones, and so actually it's kind of getting your name out. We're not a direct sales organisation either, so we go through partners more often than not. So we have to have very, very good collaborations with people like Roche and J&J and GSK and all of the pharmaceuticals, but also the systems integrators as well, and the OEMs, the Oracles, the Dells, the Fujitsus of this world. So we have a very interesting network of organisations that we have to collaborate, and in some cases we're also competing with those organisations as well. So we do have to be fairly careful. My group's really interesting insofar as we're kind of allowed to work in the kind of platform market. So what we try to do, and as an example, we're working in South Manchester around some diagnosis around fungal infections. And so at the moment, the process that they've got in South Manchester is just far too long for some critical diagnosis. They need much faster turnaround time. So they've got a company that's got a very good application, and that application does the science very, very well. But what they really need to do is then speed up that application as well. So what we do is we can come in and look at the application, and then at a very low level, at the hardware level, look at how do you speed up that application to ensure that you're really getting the most out of the hardware purchases that you've got going. So the turnaround time now for that sample going from the patient all the way through to the labs, and then back in a taxi across the road to the actual specialist who's going to make the diagnosis is much, much faster. So our team gets involved in helping with those application organisations, really tune what they're doing to the hardware and certainly to software as well. So we have to have quite a diverse team looking at that. So it's not just looking at how you build software and good front-end user interfaces, but also how people are using them, what's the user interaction. And that's why we have an anthropologist on a team. And then how do you get that data visualized to the specialists in a way that they really understand it as well. So when you think of a platform play, it's not just about the front-end side of things, it's about the whole kind of journey of getting that data in, getting it out quick enough, and then visualizing it. In the instance that we have in South Manchester, they're actually looking at it at the moment on pieces of paper. And some of these patients are dying within 72 hours if they've got certain fungal infections, and there's nothing that can be done about that. Or we're giving them £100,000 a dosage of drugs that we don't actually know if that's going to work or not. So it's all about speed that up, but then actually visualize that data so that the specialists can make more sense of that data than they're getting at the moment, which is based on paper. So platform for us is very, very interesting. We're doing some work over in the US around personalized medicine as well. So taking a lot of your genomic data and bringing together phenotypic data as well, trying to bring those two things together. And we started to look at things like digital pathology as well, and bringing those three elements together to start to look at genomic data, phenotypic and image data, and start to make kind of more sense around outcomes, how best to prescribe different types of drugs that are coming out from the pharmaceutical organisations in a kind of better kind of way. Sorry.
Just to make no, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. And then more towards and you'll be here for the rest of the afternoon as well.
Yes.
To talk more around Intel's because there's a great convergence right now that's happening with technology and healthcare, and it's a unique moment right now. And Intel's obviously at the center of that, and several tech companies, you see Google as well, increasing their investments in healthcare, and specifically towards diagnostics and drugs, because I know quite a few of you have submitted ideas around platforms. Just to define this a bit around, are you a platform technology? Are you, a lot of you are coming from academia. I know several of you are doing it. It sounds sexy and it sounds great. We're developing this great new technology that's going to pump out a bunch of products. Of course, the enthusiasm in industry is kind of cycled back and forth between their enthusiasm for platform plays. Sometimes it's quite exciting, sometimes not so much. And there's several reasons for that. A lot of it's disillusionment. The technology rapidly becomes commoditized, and other people could do the exact same thing that your platform can do. So, firstly, if you're going to ask yourself, am I a platform? Are you broadly applicable across an industry-wide problem, right? You need to gain widespread adoption across not just one therapeutic area, but multiple therapeutic areas. But also it provides an alternative, and if not, then you're a tool company. And if you do, then you also need to provide an alternative to existing processes, right? Are you more efficient? Are you less risky alternative to reaching a particular value inflection point? If you're just an add-on to an existing process and you require a lot of non-standard preceding steps that doesn't exactly have a clear path forward, then again, you're probably a basis for a service industry and you're not a platform. But if you could answer yes to that, then we have to ask, are you scalable? Could you provide greater efficiency? The technology the platform that you're developing should be more capital efficient. It should be scalable. It should be applicable to multiple projects without requiring a large upfront investment. For example, if your platform helps you design a new antimicrobial, but it requires a huge amount upfront, then there's value in what you're doing, but it's certainly not a platform technology. So that's just to quickly define that a bit, so that we're all kind of on the same page. And this applies to diagnostics, drugs. It could apply to healthcare IT if you're developing a new platform for healthcare IT, and you want to be used across, musculoskeletal or diabetes or this or that. You're not really a platform if it's going to take a huge amount up front to make your platform work for musculoskeletal, and then again in diabetes, and then again in consumer health. So really think through that as you're developing your platform, be it in any field that you're doing. Now, stay on platform a bit, because I have opinions about this, and hopefully the panel has opinions about this as well. If you are developing a platform, could you stay a platform company for very long, or do you eventually get distracted by that goal of producing a product? And what should you do? Should you stay a platform? Should you develop a product? Could you do both? Richard?
Okay. I started my biotechnology career in a platform company, Cambridge Antibody Technology, that was doing everything it could to become a product company. So I'm only going to speak about biotech. I can't talk about tech or other things. We faced a lot of competition, not a huge amount, but there were a good 3 other companies that were also providing human monoclonal antibodies back in around 2000. And that made it tough to win just through providing our technology to pharma companies, who were also quite skeptical at that point about monoclonal antibodies, believe it or not. And the value, it was very, very obvious that the value was in the products. Again, I'm talking about biotech, and maybe different in other areas. And so what we did was we tried to drag that company to being a product-based company, and we did that in a lot of ways, in collaborations with pharma, where we owned 50% of the rights to the product that we develop. We owned Humira. We discovered Humira, which was the biggest drug in the world, but that came out of our technology platform, but we only got a small royalty on that product. And as a company, we realized our investors needed us to capture far more value, what we call independent product value. And getting there is incredibly difficult. And if I look back to CAT, which was formed in 1990, why did we only get so far? We got bought by AstraZeneca primarily for the technology platform, so it does, there's still value there. But why didn't we become a Genentech? My view is that we did not have sufficient biological knowledge about disease, and we did not have enough. We had a lot of technologists who were brilliant at molecular biology, but do we have enough biologists who understand disease? Do we have enough physicians who are trying to solve a disease problem and have insight? And so I think that's one of the things you'll find is, where do you want to play? Do you want to capture, because in the pharmaceutical industry, the value's in the products, and is how much of that value do you want to capture? And is your platform going to be, it's going to be so cool, so hot, and so proprietary that you'll be able to capture enough of it for long enough? And alternatively, one of the best ways of proving a technology platform is to have a product in mind. So if you're starting a platform company and you've got a great technology, I would go out there and surround yourselves by people who actually are interested in trying to solve a disease problem, a product problem, and who might be interested in using your platform or help you develop your platform to do it. Because if you prove the route with one product, then I think you really are in a very exciting place.
And it is very hard to do both, because to bring a product forward requires an enormous amount of focus, as anybody on the panel could attest to. But to maintain your technological edge on your platform, to make sure other competitors don't develop a better platform, is also going to require a huge amount of focus. Actually, Craig, just to go back to you before we move on very quickly, because in tech, I've noticed sometimes it works the opposite way, in that first you develop the product, and then you develop the platform. Right? You see that Fitbit is a kind of a healthcare play, but first they develop their product, right? And now they're developing a platform for employers to sell, to access their Fitbit ecosystem. But they started with the product, demonstrated the product worked, and then they started lateralizing to create a platform. But it seems like it's working in reverse oftentimes with tech.
Yeah, and I think what Intel's trying to do, specifically in the consumer health kind of arena, and although we bought Basis, the watch, we've been in quite considerable negotiations with them to try and produce a kind of open standard API. Is the problem with that is the approach that they're taking is you've got to be agnostic to all the other devices on the market, because there are so many, there's a plethora of devices that are out there. So your platform has to be able to integrate into all those other things. Otherwise, you've just got a very, very small part of the market, and you're not going to be able to allow, other devices, other kind of models and makes to integrate with that particular platform. And we're trying the more very agnostic approach. We don't care what it is, just send us the data and we'll store it and then let you analyze it.
Can I just
Absolutely, yes.
So, we review a lot of platforms, and JP Morgan, company after company, will come with some great technology or software. And often when we're looking at early platforms, we'll say to them, what about target X? Have you looked at these really tough targets? Because sometimes we really need to prove that platform with a target of interest in a disease of interest. The platform per se, I think, my view is, because I also started life in a platform technology company doing proteomics, the margins are quite small, and the inflection point where you will get the large valuation is having a product that comes out of it. The companies that we're interested in the assets, and if that platform has delivered an asset, we will want that platform and the asset. If you come to us with just the platform, sometimes the partners find it disappointing. We'll say, well, look, we might do a pilot project, but it's not the big bucks. But until that's proven in a target of interest or a disease of interest to show the real value of it, I think there's limited money that you might be able to make. That's my view, and I can bring that from the proteomics, where we started out at Oxford Glycosciences when I joined in 97, very much doing industrialized proteomics. But the inflection was coming from what targets were we discovering, and then were we making molecules to those targets.
Okay. Great. And just to very quickly, we have about 10 minutes left. Now we're going to try to very quickly in 10 minutes talk about 3 different types of exits. I think we could do it. Let's stay on task. So we have IPOs, we have trade sales, and we have potential licensing deals. Let's actually start with licensing deals. So Sonal, your team actually does quite a few partnerships. Yeah. You basically have a PhD now in licensing, given how it turns out.
So I can talk about the types of things we do in the External Innovation Group. We do a lot of shared risk models, which means that if we look at an opportunity, we see one of the models we have is that has the partner got sufficient funds to take it to a certain point, and then we will have an option to license once that opportunity reaches a certain de-risk point and met some criteria. So we will, there's usually an upfront. We don't want to be too tight on the upfront. We need to know that they can carry those projects through, but it's almost backloaded to success. So the payments will come if the product is successful or that opportunity is successful. And then we'll license that opportunity. That could be a form of exit for that company, depending on how large that company is.
And again, if you're a platform company, that's your first product you came out, maybe you're able to license it out, and it's going to fund. That's the idealized situation, and then it funds future children coming out of that platform. Richard, trade sale, they sound obvious, but you have some experience with this. Take us through the mechanics. These don't happen overnight. They're quite difficult to do. Take us through the mechanics of the sale.
So, trade sale is exactly that. Usually the company and its equity is bought, or sometimes for whatever reasons, it works out that the two parties wish to dissect out the asset in the company and buy that separately and then leave the shell empty. They both qualify as trade sale. It is what we call in the industry, and you will have heard this term, it is an exit, because typically, the investors get, to realise the value in the company or the asset, and that's it. Interestingly, again, things go in trends. We tend to see trade sales actually is not necessarily so dissimilar to licensing. Certainly since the financial crisis, we've seen a lot of what we would call back-ended deals, where there is an upfront to acquire the company or the asset, but there are a series of staged payments, milestones, and even royalties paid on the asset when it gets to the market to the original investors. So it's actually becoming very hybrid. Often looks a little bit like licensing, and that was very much in vogue, around 2008, 2009, after the financial crisis. I think we're probably going back more towards, pure trade, single things with just upfront cash exits, and the mechanics are quite simple. The two parties will negotiate what the deal looks like. What's the price that's going to be paid? Are there going to be any staged payments, contingent payments that may get paid if certain things happen or don't happen in the future? And once those kind of headline things are agreed, the parties will negotiate what is typically called a sale and purchase agreement, which will be signed and the company will be sold. But that is probably only part of the process. That's quite mechanical. It's fun, it's difficult, but there's a whole load of other stuff happens. There's the dance up to that. Why is the one company wanting to buy the other company? So they will have need to know about the product or the technology. They will need to have been convinced about it. And the company that's selling itself may even run a process, may make it competitive. It may even be a full-blown auction process. And the other thing is, of course, the acquirer will want to do what's called due diligence. So if you're going into this world, you'll get to learn that word a lot. Due diligence is anything you do to check out something before taking an action, whether it's making an investment, buying something. If you're buying a house and you go and check it out and you go and get your lawyers to do surveys, that's due diligence. And due diligence is a really important thing. If a pharma company is buying a potential drug, there is so much they need to know about it. They need to know about its, about the science and what's the data that was generated to support that science as being real. They need to know about the intellectual property position. They need to know how's it being manufactured. What are the people involved like? Are they trustworthy, and so on. And it's a massive exercise. It's huge, and getting some perspective of what that takes early on when setting up a startup is probably quite good. At XO1, we actually, because it was an asset-centric company designed for trade sale, we actually set up, the whole company was set up to facilitate due diligence. So we didn't have any internal documentation. Everything was kept electronically. It was kept in the cloud in our own filing system, which actually, when we started doing due diligence with Johnson & Johnson, when they started doing due diligence on us, we just basically provided them the passwords to that folder structure in the cloud, and they were able to see everything. We built it ready to facilitate that due diligence process, and it's actually good practice to have that kind of discipline when you set up a company.
So actually, it's a great segue actually, because I assume there's significant due diligence in any sort of licensing deal you might do.
Absolutely, and I would Rich has described really well the whole process of good record keeping. What we're essentially doing is, how trustful is the data? Can we believe it? And very commonly, I'd say this is a trend at Roche, is that we will do an MTA. Some Genentech, so a material transfer agreement. So if you have an asset, we will want to reproduce some of that data, and you won't get a term sheet until it's agreed. But this is the step one. Each company approaches this very differently. I know at Genentech, no MTA, you won't even get a discussion. At Roche, initially, we've had our fingers burnt. We've bought things, and then the data has not been robust, and we've lost millions. And so, increasingly at governance, what we'd have is, you don't go in there without having an MTA in place. So that could be, if you've got a nice new macrolide or an antibiotic that you think is really, combating some really hard to treat infections, then we will want to reproduce, not necessarily create new data, and this is up for discussion, but we want to check the robustness of that data in our models to our standards, and this is a really important step. But we do on-site visits. We probably don't need to go into the details, but we really want to meet the team. We want to see eyeball to eyeball. And you get very different interactions. We talk about all the soft factors. When when the management are in the room versus when the scientists are alone. We talk about this when we do our debriefs. What were the interactions like? Do we feel they were holding back? We go back, we have telecons, and it's all about, it's a relationship and trust building. And so, but the robustness of the data is key for us, because once we come in, there's a real commitment to take that opportunity forward. And the downstream costs are huge. As I've just said, our eye is to take this all the way forward. So, the hundreds of millions that might have gone in, or the millions, the amount of investment made by that startup are still a fraction of what is required downstream.
No, that's actually great. And what we want to really emphasize, especially when it comes to licensing deals, is that we understand trade sales being an exit or IPOs being an exit. We can touch on IPOs. But not often is discussed that you could kind of exit via licensing deal, and really structure that relationship right now with a pharma company or with a company that does digital health or devices. And so do consider that, especially as you're bringing your idea forward. Is it worth talking about IPOs before we go? I know you guys are just so far removed from IPOs. They seem sexy and they seem simple. But anybody wants to talk through, some of the challenge, actually the pros and cons? Like, why would you want to take your company public?
I mean, I'll touch on that. I mean, the whole point of an IPO is you put your company as a listed entity so it can access public markets. And there are only so many private investors in the world, and theoretically, when you go to the public markets, there's a huge amount more capital available. But when you do that, you are signing up to certain governance requirements and transparency requirements that are not there in private companies, and there's a whole lot of compliance costs as well. So and your share price could be very, you'll have a share price and it'll be listed, and therefore you could be very volatile. If you're a small company with one thing, you will live or die by the news flow you generate. So it can be quite a precarious place to be as a small company, but it is a way, investors, they will list the equity they have, the private investors, and they'll effectively sell it to the public investors, as well as raise some additional cash normally. So it is a viable exit route. It goes in swings and cycles. The IPO market has been reopened in the US for biotech for a little while now, but it wasn't that long ago, only a couple of years ago, where it was all doom and gloom and there were no IPOs in biotech. It's incredible how cyclical it is, and then nobody can remember what the bad times were like, and then when the good times come, and then when the bad times come, nobody can remember what the good times were like. So you have to you have to time it right if you're going to go near the public markets, I think.
Okay, no, that's a great point, and I would say, at least Craig, in terms of tech companies, it seems like one of the key risks of actually going public lately has been the public markets have been valuing these companies much lower than the private markets have been valuing them. So right now, I guess there's a lot of cheap capital in the private markets, but once they go public and they start shining a light on your growth rate, a quarterly light on your growth rate, and a quarterly light on what your sales and margins are, sometimes it doesn't look pretty. But we're pretty much out of time. Let's actually do a few questions. Is that all right, Matt? Matt, thinking of our next seminar. Are there any questions for our panelists around business models? Yes, sir.
I was wondering if you all could address the partnering dilemma of sort of the chicken and the egg, where companies need financing to generate the data, but then data to generate the deal. To what extent do you find larger partners willing to help finance generating data that you want to see, as opposed to saying, well, come back when you've got it?
Shall I start with that? I think, I mean, that's one of the things it's very important to us at Johnson & Johnson with the innovation centres. We often, it would be fair to say that, if an entrepreneur has an idea, have they been able to raise some finance is often a good test, actually. But to your point, we actually have the ability to seed finance companies from scratch. We have our own venture capital arm called JJDC, and that's our strategic investor. It works very closely. It's actually deployed to the innovation centres. And if necessary, we could work with entrepreneurs to actually seed the company. We often will provide funding to get critical pieces of data generated and to help entrepreneurs. We've just actually launched the Apollo Fund, with the University of Cambridge, AstraZeneca, GSK, Imperial, and UCL. I mustn't leave anybody out. And we have that's a £40 million fund that we are using in those particular universities to help academics and entrepreneurs get that data. So we could fund, between £1 and £3 million per, per project, maybe a bit less if necessary, to help them generate that critical data that they wouldn't otherwise have. So we're very, very aware of the problem, and it's one of the things we are seeking to address.
Any other questions?
I was just going to make a point from an Intel perspective on that question. So what we've tended to try and help out with is some of the kind of hardware and software and hosting kind of problems, and also providing some resources in to be able to collect that data and analyse that data, especially when you're talking about large volumes of data and integrating it. So a number of instances we've actually kind of put in servers in the hardware in there to enable your reduced capital cost. So you're not outlaying big amounts of money right up front that you might lose at the end of the day if you don't get the deal. And we're, of course, interested in that, because if it runs brilliantly on Intel and you show those great results, then, of course, when they do come to buy a big capital purchase, then they're going to look at Intel. So we try and help with that, as well as our team. We're not kind of a consultancy organisation. We don't charge a day rate. What we look at is the most interesting, complex problems to try and meet. So.
I can just add to that as well. It depends how much money you're asking for and what data you need to generate. So in the framework we're working, if it's what I like to call it is we're doing an extended diligence with the partner. So when we do an externalized opportunity where the partner's maintaining control, it's a live diligence, and actually what we're doing is de-risking, and we will provide some money to fill the gaps in that data package. If you're talking about the type of data might be an animal model result or a tool antibody, there are other frameworks within pharma, so it might not fit the externalized framework of what we typically deliver to a GLP tox ready asset, which might take several millions. But if it's to generate a key data set, then we've got different frameworks. So we have something called, it's a bit like partnerships with academia, or providing this scale of money where we can de-risk a project. So there are other ways of working with pharma to tap into those other business models.
Well, we get a round of applause for our panel.
This scale of money where we can de-risk a project. So there are other ways of working with pharma to tap into those other business models.
Well, we get a round of applause for our panel.